The watching trail. The thing about Marcus Chen was that he never believed in anything he couldn't photograph. At 28, with a growing Instagram following of outdoor enthusiasts and a philosophy degree he'd never used, he'd spent the last 3 years documenting trails across North America. The Appalachian Mountains were supposed to be just another backdrop, another collection of golden hour shots and moody forest compositions. He'd laughed when the ranger at the visitor center in Cherokee, North Carolina, handed him a photocopied list of safety guidelines that included the handwritten edition: "If you hear your name called, do not answer. Do not acknowledge it." Superstitious locals, he'd told his girlfriend, Jenna Park, as they'd driven toward the trailhead. She'd nodded absently, her attention focused on her phone screen, trying to get the last bars of signal to post their "Adventure Begins" story. Jenna was 26, worked in marketing, and had never been camping before this trip. She wore brand-new hiking boots that Marcus had warned her needed breaking in, and she'd packed 3 different outfits for photos, each carefully chosen to look effortlessly outdoorsy. Their friends, Kyle and Amanda Winters, followed in a second car. Kyle was Marcus's college roommate, 30 years old, recently promoted to senior analyst at his firm, and possessed the particular arrogance of someone who'd never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with enough research and preparation. He'd spent 2 weeks planning this trip, printing topographical maps, studying weather patterns, buying emergency supplies they'd probably never need. Amanda, his wife of 2 years, was quieter, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. She'd been reluctant to come, Marcus remembered. Something about a nightmare she'd had about trees with too many branches. They'd chosen the Lost Creek Trail, a moderately difficult 8-mile loop that promised waterfalls and panoramic views. It was early October, and the mountains were beginning their transformation into autumn fire. The parking lot held only 2 other vehicles when they arrived at 10:17 a.m. Marcus checked his watch, a habit from his photography work, always tracking the light. The first hour was perfect. The trail wound through a tunnel of ancient oaks and maples, their canopy filtering the morning sun into cathedral light. Marcus stopped every few minutes to photograph, making Jenna pose on moss-covered logs, her smile bright and genuine. Kyle kept checking his GPS watch, announcing their pace, their elevation gain, their estimated arrival time at the waterfall. Amanda walked quietly behind them, her hand occasionally reaching out to touch the rough bark of the trees they passed, as if reassuring herself they were real. At 11:23 a.m., Kyle stopped abruptly. "Anyone else notice how quiet it's gotten?" Marcus lowered his camera. Kyle was right. The bird song that had accompanied them for the past hour had stopped. Not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had muted the forest. Even the wind had stilled. The only sound was their breathing and the crunch of leaves under their boots. "Probably just a predator nearby," Marcus said, but his voice came out softer than intended. "Deer, maybe. Or a bear." "The guidebook said bears are rare in this section," Kyle replied, pulling out his phone to check the downloaded trail map. His screen flickered, then went black. "That's weird." Battery was at 78%. Jenna laughed nervously. "Mine too. It just died." She pressed the power button repeatedly, but nothing happened. Marcus felt a cold thread of unease work its way down his spine. His camera was still working, mechanical, no batteries required except for the light meter. But when he tried to check his phone, the screen remained dark. Even Kyle's GPS watch had frozen, the digits stuck at 11:23. "Equipment malfunction," Kyle said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Probably electromagnetic interference from the rock formations." They continued walking, but the silence pressed against them now, thick and watchful. Marcus found himself looking over his shoulder every few steps. The trail seemed darker, though logically the sun should have been climbing higher, brightening the forest. Instead, shadows pooled between the trees, deep and somehow wrong, as if they were cast by objects that weren't there. Amanda stopped. "Did you see that?" "See what?" Jenna asked, moving closer to Marcus. "There was, someone standing between those trees, just for a second." Amanda pointed to a gap in the forest about 30 yards to their left. "They were just standing there, watching us." "Probably another hiker," Marcus said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. He'd seen it too, just at the edge of his vision. A figure, tall and unnaturally still, that vanished the moment he tried to look directly at it. "We should keep moving," Kyle said, and for the first time his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "The waterfall is only another mile. There'll be other people there." But there weren't other people. When they reached the waterfall at what should have been 12:15 p.m., though none of their devices were working to confirm, the scenic overlook was empty. The waterfall itself was beautiful, a 30-foot cascade tumbling over ancient stone, but something about it felt wrong. The water made no sound as it fell. Marcus raised his camera and took a photo, then another, but through the viewfinder, the waterfall looked different, darker, and in the mist at its base, there were shapes that might have been rocks or might have been something else. "I want to go back," Amanda said. Her voice was shaking. "I want to leave, now." "We're halfway through the loop," Kyle protested. "It's actually shorter to keep going than to backtrack." "I don't care about shorter," Amanda snapped. "Something is wrong here. Can't you feel it? We're being watched." Marcus did feel it. They all did. It was like pressure against his skin, the sensation of eyes tracking his every movement. When he turned to look back down the trail they'd come from, he could swear the trees were closer together than they'd been moments before. The path narrower, darker. "Let's vote," Jenna suggested. "I think we should keep going. We're experienced hikers." She glanced at Marcus, who'd never corrected her enthusiastic exaggeration of his skills. "And it's just a forest. We'll be back at the car in a few hours." "I vote we go back," Amanda said. "Keep going," Kyle added. "It's safer. We know what's ahead. The trail is well marked." All eyes turned to Marcus. He thought about the figure he'd seen, the impossible silence, the way the shadows seemed to move independently of any light source. He thought about the ranger's handwritten warning. But he also thought about his Instagram feed, about the photos of the waterfall, about not looking like a coward in front of his friends. "We keep going," he said. Amanda's face went pale, but she nodded. They ate lunch at the Overlook, trail mix and energy bars that tasted like ash in Marcus's mouth, and then continued on the second half of the loop. That was when things began to change in ways that couldn't be rationalized. The trail, which Kyle's printed map showed as a clear, well-maintained path, began to fork. Not once, but repeatedly, splits in the trail that shouldn't have been there, that weren't on any map. Kyle stood at one such junction, comparing the physical reality to his printout, his hands trembling slightly. "This isn't possible," he muttered. "These forks don't exist. The trail doesn't split here." "So which way do we go?" Jenna asked. She'd been quiet for the past half hour, her earlier enthusiasm completely extinguished. Marcus noticed something odd about the left-hand path. The leaves on the ground were arranged too perfectly, as if someone had placed them there deliberately. And was that? Yes, those were footprints, boot prints, leading down the left fork, recent prints, the edges still sharp. "Someone else came through here recently," he said, pointing. "Let's follow their tracks. At least we know another person thought this was the right way." They followed the prints for 20 minutes, the forest growing denser around them. The trees here were older, their trunks massive and gnarled, their branches reaching across the path to create a tunnel of wood and shadow. Moss hung from the branches like tattered curtains, and mushrooms clustered around the tree roots in colors that seemed too bright, too vivid. Amanda was the first to notice. "These footprints," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look at them carefully." Marcus crouched down. The boot treads were familiar. very familiar, because they matched his own boots exactly. He looked back at the trail behind them, at the prints they were leaving, and felt his stomach drop. They were following their own footprints. But that was impossible, because these prints led forward, into areas they hadn't walked yet. "We need to get off this trail," Amanda said. "Now. We need to cut through the forest and find the main path." "That's the worst thing we could do," Kyle argued, but his voice lacked conviction. "You never leave the marked trail. That's rule 1. "What marked trail?" Amanda's voice rose to a shout. "Look around, Kyle! Does any of this look marked to you? Does any of this look like a trail that exists?" She was right. The path beneath their feet was fading, becoming less distinct, as if it were slowly erasing itself. The forest floor was taking over, leaves and moss covering what had been clear ground moments before. That was when they heard it. A voice, calling from somewhere ahead in the trees. "Marcus!" It was his mother's voice, exactly as he remembered it, with that particular inflection she used when calling him for dinner when he was a child. But his mother was in San Francisco, and she had no way of knowing he was here. "Don't answer," Amanda hissed, grabbing his arm. "Don't acknowledge it." "Marcus, honey, where are you?" His throat worked, the urge to respond almost overwhelming. It sounded so much like her, so perfectly, heartbreakingly like her. "Jenna!" Another voice now, male, calling for his girlfriend. "Jenna, I need help. I'm hurt." "That's my brother," Jenna whispered, tears streaming down her face. "That's David, but he's in Boston. He's supposed to be in Boston." "Kyle! Amanda!" More voices now, multiple voices, some familiar, some not, all calling their names from different directions in the forest. The voices echoed strangely, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They stood frozen in the center of the fading path, hands clasped together, none of them daring to respond. The voices continued for what felt like hours, but might have been minutes, growing more insistent, more desperate, more wrong. Because underneath the perfect mimicry, there was something else, a quality that was almost like hunger. Then, as suddenly as they'd started, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was worse. "We need to move," Kyle said. "Pick a direction and move. Standing still is death." They chose what they thought was north, using the weak afternoon sun as a guide, and pushed into the forest off the deteriorating trail. The undergrowth was thick, branches catching at their clothes, thorns scratching their skin. Amanda was crying silently, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. Jenna walked like an automaton, one foot in front of the other, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Marcus kept his camera around his neck, occasionally raising it to take a photo, though he wasn't sure why. Some instinct told him to document this, to prove it had happened, though to whom and for what purpose, he couldn't say. After an hour of struggling through the dense forest, they emerged into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing, impossible and undeniable, stood a staircase. It was made of rusted metal, maybe 12 steps rising to a platform that ended in nothing but air. No house, no structure, no reason for its existence. It simply stood there, in the middle of the Appalachian wilderness, as if it had always been there and always would be. "Don't look at it," Amanda said immediately. "Don't acknowledge it. We walk around it, we don't look at it, we don't talk about it." But Kyle was already walking toward it, that analytical part of his brain trying to make sense of the senseless. "It has to be from an old fire tower," he said. "Or maybe a demolished cabin. There's a logical explanation." "Kyle, stop," Amanda pleaded. "Please stop." He was at the base now, his hand reaching out to touch the railing. "See? It's just metal. Just stairs. Nothing supernatural about—" His words cut off. His entire body went rigid, hand frozen on the railing. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, his head began to turn. Not toward them, but upward, toward the top of the stairs where the platform ended in empty air. "Kyle?" Amanda whispered. He took a step up, then another. "Kyle!" Amanda screamed, running toward him. Marcus grabbed her, holding her back. "Don't touch him! Don't touch the stairs!" Kyle climbed methodically, each step deliberate, until he reached the platform at the top. He stood there, swaying slightly, looking at something they couldn't see, something beyond the edge of the platform. Then he smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Marcus had ever seen, that smile. Too wide, too empty, as if Kyle's face was being worn by something that had never smiled before and didn't quite know how. "It's beautiful," Kyle said, his voice dreamy and distant. "Can't you see it? It's so beautiful. I just need to step through and I'll understand everything." "Kyle, come back down," Amanda begged. "Please, come back to me." He looked down at her then, and for just a second, something of the real Kyle flickered in his eyes. His smile faltered. "Amanda," he said, and his voice was his own again. "Amanda, run, run now. It's not—" His body jerked, as if yanked by invisible strings. The smile returned, wrong and wide. He turned back to face the empty air beyond the platform. "Kyle, don't!" Marcus shouted. Kyle stepped forward, off the platform, into nothing. He didn't fall. He simply vanished, as completely as if he'd never existed. One moment he was there, stepping into empty air, and the next moment there was nothing. No body, no sound, no trace. Amanda's scream was a raw animal thing. She collapsed, and Jenna caught her, both of them sinking to the ground. Marcus stood frozen, his camera hanging forgotten around his neck, staring at the empty platform where his best friend had been seconds before. They didn't know how long they stayed there. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, when Amanda's screams had faded to broken sobs, Marcus helped the women to their feet. They gave the staircase a wide berth, none of them able to look at it directly, and continued in what they hoped was the direction of the trailhead. The forest had changed again. The trees were wrong. Their trunks twisted in impossible spirals, their branches reaching toward the ground instead of the sky. The light was failing, though it couldn't have been later than mid-afternoon. And everywhere, in every shadow, at the edge of every glance, there were figures, watching, waiting. Marcus stopped trying to count them. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, standing motionless between the trees. They were almost human-shaped, but wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. Too tall or too thin, or with too many joints in their limbs. They never moved when observed directly, but every time he looked away and looked back, they were closer. "Don't look at them," he told the others. "Just keep walking." But Jenna couldn't help it. Her eyes were drawn to the figures, and Marcus watched with horror as recognition dawned on her face. "Marcus," she whispered, "that one, it looks like Kyle." And it did. One of the figures, standing about 20 yards to their right, had Kyle's height, Kyle's build, was wearing Kyle's clothes. But its movements were wrong, jerky and unnatural, like a puppet with tangled strings. As they watched, it raised one hand and waved at them. The gesture was a mockery of human movement. They ran. Branches tore at their faces, roots caught their feet, and all around them the watchers kept pace effortlessly, gliding between the trees without seeming to move their legs. Marcus could hear Jenna and Amanda gasping behind him, could hear his own heart hammering in his chest, could hear nothing else except that terrible, persistent silence. Then, impossibly, they burst through a line of trees and onto a paved parking lot. The trailhead. Their cars were there, exactly as they'd left them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The ordinary world returned. Marcus fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit them in the lock. Amanda was sobbing, saying Kyle's name over and over. Jenna stood frozen, staring back at the tree line. where dozens of figures stood motionless in the shadows, watching them with eyes that reflected the dying light. They climbed into Marcus's car. No one wanted to take Kyle's vehicle. And he drove without stopping, drove until they reached the highway and real traffic and lights and people. Only then did they stop at a gas station, harsh fluorescent lights and the smell of gasoline and normalcy. Amanda called the police. She reported Kyle missing, gave them the details of the trail. A search and rescue team was dispatched immediately. For 3 days, they searched every inch of the Lost Creek Trail. They found nothing. No body. No gear, no sign that Kyle Winters had ever been there. But they did find something else. A photograph, lying on the ground near the waterfall. One of Marcus's photos, printed out and left face up on the trail. In the image, the 4 of them stood at the trailhead, smiling before their hike began. But in the background, barely visible among the trees, were figures. Dozens of figures watching them from the forest. The metadata on Marcus's camera showed the photo had been taken at 10:22 a.m., just 5 minutes after they'd arrived. The printed copy, forensics determined, had been created at 3:47 p.m., 6 hours later. There was no printer within 20 miles of the trail. Marcus never went hiking again. He deleted his Instagram account, burned his hiking gear, and moved back to the city where concrete and steel and crowds of people could keep the silence at bay. But sometimes in quiet moments, he hears it. A voice calling his name. His mother's voice, or Jenna's, or Kyle's. Always calling, always patient. And sometimes, late at night, he hears footsteps outside his apartment. The tread pattern is familiar. They match his hiking boots exactly. The ones he burned. The footsteps that walk ahead of him, leading him somewhere he's trying very hard not to follow. Amanda was found 3 weeks after the incident, sitting in her car in the parking lot of the Lost Creek trailhead. The car doors were locked from the inside. She was smiling. When the police broke in, they found her unresponsive, her eyes open and staring at something they couldn't see. In her lap was a note, written in handwriting that matched Kyle's perfectly. "It's beautiful here. Come see. We're all waiting." Amanda remained catatonic for 6 months before she died quietly in her hospital bed. The doctors said her heart simply stopped, though she was young and healthy, and there was no medical reason for her death. But the nurses reported that in her final moments, she'd smiled, raised one hand as if reaching for someone, and whispered, "I'm coming." Jenna lasted longer. She threw herself into therapy, medication, support groups. For a while, it seemed like she would be okay. She got engaged to someone new, planned a wedding, moved to Seattle to start fresh. Marcus was invited to the wedding, but didn't go. He couldn't face her, couldn't face the questions in her eyes that matched his own. What really happened on that trail? What did Kyle see before he stepped off that platform? On what would have been her wedding day, Jenna didn't show up to the ceremony. Her fiancé found her apartment empty, everything neatly packed away. On her kitchen table was her phone, working now, fully charged, and a single photo on the screen. It showed Jenna standing in a forest, smiling, holding hands with someone whose face was just out of frame. The geolocation data placed the photo at the Lost Creek Trail. It had been taken that morning. Search and rescue found nothing, just like with Kyle, just like with the 37 other people who'd vanished from Appalachian trails in the past decade, all following the same pattern. No bodies, no evidence, just questions and silence and families who would never have closure. Marcus knows he should leave, get as far from the mountains as possible. But he's started having dreams. In them, he's back on the trail, camera in hand, and Kyle is there, whole and smiling, beckoning him forward. "You have to see this," Dream Kyle says. "You have to photograph it. It's the shot of a lifetime. The shot that will make you understand everything." And Marcus always follows, even though he knows it's a dream, knows where it leads, because part of him the part that was touched by whatever lives in those ancient mountains, wants to see, wants to understand, wants to step off the platform into the beautiful nothing that Kyle found. His apartment is on the 16th floor, but lately he's been hearing footsteps on the fire stairs. Climbing, always climbing, but never quite reaching his door. The footsteps wear his hiking boots. Sometimes there are 2 sets, then 3. Soon he knows there will be 4. The Appalachian Mountains are old. Older than the Rockies, older than the Alps, some of the oldest mountains on Earth. They have stood for nearly 500 million years, watching civilizations rise and fall, watching species come and go. They have seen things, know things, and they keep their secrets well. Marcus Chen still lives in his city apartment, but he stopped fighting the pull. He knows now that he was marked the moment he stepped onto that trail, maybe even before. Maybe he was marked from the moment he decided he didn't believe in anything he couldn't photograph. Because the truth is, he did photograph something. In the hundreds of pictures he took that day, in the background of almost every shot, there are figures, watching, waiting, patient as the mountains themselves, and in the very last photo on his camera, one he has no memory of taking, one that was captured at 11:23 a.m. according to the timestamp, the exact moment all their devices failed. There's an image that shouldn't exist. It's a selfie. Not of Marcus, but taken with his camera from his perspective. The photo shows the trail ahead, the other 3 hikers walking forward, oblivious, and it shows Marcus himself, standing among the trees to the left of the trail, watching them pass. He's smiling, he's wearing his hiking gear, and his eyes are wrong, too dark, too knowing, reflecting nothing. That photo was taken 3 hours before Kyle disappeared. The thing wearing Marcus's face in that photograph knew what was going to happen. It was already waiting for them. Had always been waiting, would always be waiting. Time means nothing to the things that live in those mountains. Past, present, and future are just different rooms in the same ancient house. Marcus has stopped trying to explain it, stopped trying to rationalize it. Some nights he stands at his window and looks toward the mountains, barely visible as a dark smudge on the horizon. And he knows that somewhere on the Lost Creek Trail, there are figures standing in the eternal twilight between the trees. One of them wears Kyle's face, one wears Amanda's, one wears Jenna's, and one wears his. Not someday, not eventually. Right now, in this moment, there is a version of Marcus Chen standing on that trail, waiting patiently for the next group of hikers who don't believe in anything they can't see. He understands now what Kyle saw before he stepped off the platform. It wasn't death, or transcendence, or any of the things people imagine when they think of the unknown. It was time folded over on itself, past and present and future existing simultaneously. Kyle saw himself stepping off the platform, saw it happen before it happened, saw it happen after it happened, saw that it had always happened and would always happen. There is no escaping the Appalachian Trail once it has marked you. You can run to cities, hide in crowds, surround yourself with steel and concrete and electric light, but the mountains are patient. They have been here for 500 million years. They can wait. Marcus Chen photographs the city now, safe subjects, buildings and streets and people. But sometimes in the background of his shots, if you look closely enough, you can see them. Figures standing in the shadows of alleyways, watching from the windows of empty buildings, always just at the edge of the frame. They're waiting. They're patient. And eventually, everyone who hears their name called in the forest comes back to answer. The mountains never forget. The mountains always win, and the mountains are always watching.